I have a rendezvous with death. We'll preserve the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.
No fear. No political correctness. No wokeism. You're listening to Underground USA.
It's interesting how the mainstream media, useful idiots, wail about a politicized Department of Justice after spending 4 years during the Biden administration running interference for some of the most egregious acts of political persecution our country has ever had to endure. In reporting on reformative moves made by Attorney General Pam Bondi at the DOJ, reformative actions mandated by the American people in the landslide re-election of Donald Trump to the presidency, the Associated Press's Eric Tucker and Alanna Durkin Richer had the unmitigated gall to report this.
Even for a department that has endured its share of scandals, the moves have produced upheaval not seen in decades, tested its independence, and rattled the foundations of an institution that has long prided itself on being driven solely by facts, evidence, and the law. As firings and resignations mount, the unrest raises the question of whether a president who raged against his own Justice Department during his first term can succeed in bending it to his will in his second.
Tucker and Richer completely ignore this arguable fact. When a government agency or department has been corrupted, sometimes a complete reformation is needed. Wrongs must be righted for that department or agency to be reclaimed for the nation's service. Where Tucker, Richer, and the AP see a radical deviation from the politically motivated corrupt practices of the Obama and Biden administrations, not to mention the Clinton tenure, that deviation isn't one that goes from legitimacy to corruption. Rather, it's a course correction that moves from swampeteer corruption and opportunism to legitimacy, a return to constitutional law, to the rule of law, and the rejection and termination of the lawfare that the deep state status quo seeks, that the deep state status quo is doing and has been perpetrating on the political opposition. The irony here is that the Fourth Estate, which is supposed to be bound to a quest for objectivity and truth, an entity that speaks truth to power, exists now as a blinded entity the public cannot trust, an entity that exists in Jerry Seinfeld's bizarro world, where everything is opposite of what it should be. Today's mainstream media speaks the language of power and opportunism to truth and fact. As the Trump administration and its newly seated cabinet and agency heads expose corruption executed for decades by the deep state uniparty insiders, media organizations like the AP, New York Times, Washington Post, and the like, so used to the status quo of the swamp, can't differentiate between legitimate moves to return the federal government to the people and the criminally opportunistic moves that moved it away from the people in the first place. In a statement made about the termination of what appeared to be a case of political retribution against New York's Democrat Mayor Eric Adams, Bondi's spokesman, Chad Mizell, said this.
The decision to dismiss the indictment of Eric Adams is yet another indication that this DOJ will return to its core function of prosecuting dangerous criminals, not pursuing politically motivated witch hunts.
He went on to accuse the prosecutors of acting without evidence and executing their offices with disordered and ulterior motives. And isn't that what the Department of Justice is supposed to be? A department of the federal government that serves the people through the application of the letter of the law and the facts of any investigation that leads them to move to a prosecution? Did the mainstream media players get so used to writing and hearing their own ideologically motivated false narratives, championing corrupt political persecutions of retribution, that they've come to believe their own falsehoods? That indicting your political rivals without true justifiable cause and for the sole purpose of ending careers and political movements is a legitimate role for our U.S. Justice Department? That it's good government and legitimate use of law enforcement to jail and hold nonviolent protesters who executed their First Amendment rights to redress government and in defiance of their Sixth Amendment rights to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury? The winds of change, a legitimate change meant to restore us to the U.S. Constitution. Those winds have come to the deep state swamp that is the Washingtonian inside the Beltway world. For the swampeteers and the political status quo bottom feeders of that world, change will be difficult, like kicking a heroin addiction. But in the end, our republic will be healthier for it, and our federal government will be returned to a state where it serves the people, not the swamp's pocket-filling reprobates. Alinsky wrote about this concept in his book Rules for Radicals. When pushing for reform, change often requires a degree of chaos, pain, and disruption to challenge the status quo. Alinsky may have been ideologically evil, but damn if he wasn't right about that. When we come back, our segment on America's Third Watch broadcast nationally from our flagship station WGUL, AM 930 and FM 93.7 in Tampa, Florida.
You're listening to Underground USA.
A free and independent media is the backbone of our great republic. So it's crucial to have media outlets that aren't influenced by big tech censorship or the leftist mainstream media complex. But that means supporting journalistic outlets that bring us the truth without spinning facts to push a narrative. For less than the cost of a cup of coffee once a month at Starbucks, you can support the free speech mission of undergroundusa.com, an independent, reader-supported, and sometimes irreverent podcast and publication that gives you the real story without the bias. Go to undergroundusa.com/UUSA. That's undergroundusa.com/UUSA to receive a 25% discount on an annual subscription, bringing every new podcast and article directly into your email inbox, circumventing the censors and fact-checkers. Remember, knowledge is power, and staying informed is one of the best ways to protect our republic. Go out there and seek the truth, my friends. Subscribe to undergroundusa.com today.
News, insight, passion. AM 930, The Answer.
First off, it is President's Day, and that's a pretty cool thing in and of itself. And Frank, on the day before President's Day, Donald Trump goes out to Daytona, and again is close to the people and showing them, hey, I understand where you're coming from.
No, I wouldn't read too much into it, because I'm sure that his media guru said it would be advantageous to actually do that. But you're right. It sent a signal that he is on the side of the everyman, instead of somebody who is only concerned with the elitists amongst the oligarchy of the United States, as Mr. Biden would put it. Right. So kudos to him for having the insight into understanding what kind of a signal that sent.
Absolutely. And of course, Frank, on this President's Day, we look back and we think about Washington or Lincoln or, JFK or, presidents at Reagan, very consequential presidents. I think Donald Trump is going to wind up in that pantheon as to how history is going to look back at him, because what we're even seeing over the last month has been entirely consequential.
Well, time tells the tale, of course. We should remember that President's Day was a move to conglomerate both Lincoln's birthday and Washington's birthday.
Right, exactly.
And I have, many people suspect that that's because they wanted to make sure that it wasn't celebrating, first, one of the old white men slave owners with a wig, and the other somebody connected to the issue of slavery. So they decided to homogenize it into President's Day. Not every president deserves to be celebrated,
Right.
But that said, he joins a very unique group of people. It's very limited and very select, whether you agreed with who joined those ranks or not. So you do look back on the ones that actually made a difference, and you should look back on the ones that caused a lot of damage too, so that we remember history.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just a day to sit there and then say, well, it's off. We can't, up north you don't barbecue. Down south I suppose you could, but you have to remember it for everything that it is, all the good and all the bad. The United States is a country that has its scars, but these scars heal, and that skin gets tougher, and we learn our lessons from it. As far as Donald Trump joining the faces on Mount Olympus, time will tell. It's certainly a historic election for a couple of reasons. One, you had the re-election of a non-incumbent president. That does not happen all the time.
Right.
And two, it should be a celebration of the courage that the American people had to pivot. Pivot away from what was damaging the United States and the idea of freedom and liberty, whether it's at home or around the world, to a more trusting course in what Americanism is and what individualism is, and recognizing the evils of this conglomerate of the deep state that's been assembled by people who can only be described as opportunists. So President's Day you reflect on a lot of different things, but the condition of the country is certainly one of the things that we have to have retrospect on.
Oh, sure. Well, I think, though, if we look at, as you mentioned, yes, Washington and Lincoln's birthdays. Washington, we wouldn't have a country without George Washington. And then also, of course, we wouldn't have a country, at least in its form, without Lincoln, without him, going and leading through the Civil War. And of course, Frank, one of the great thought experiments I've always, heard about and thought about myself is, what would Lincoln have been like if he had lived? And what would Reconstruction have been like? I think we might have lived in a very different country altogether as well, if Lincoln had not been taken.
Well, certainly the fiber of the country would have been different, and certainly the Reconstruction would have been dramatically different. But I think the American people and time itself wouldn't have strayed too far from where we are. The world tends to thrust moments upon every country of the world, and the United States is included. So we would have seen World War I, and we would have seen World War II, and some of the things that we saw, especially in the battle against discrimination and racism and that in the South. It just would have been different about how we would have gone about getting here.
Frank, this last Saturday we did see more hostages come out, but the spectacle that Hamas puts on is kind of reprehensible, in my opinion.
No, I think it reinforces the fact that every time that they release 3 hostages and put on this giant charade that they put on, it highlights the fact that the ratio of hostages to criminals being released is ridiculous. It's like 300 to 180.
Yeah.
Why, that just goes to show you how much more Israelis value the lives of their people. If the lives of 3 Israelis is worth 180 Palestinians, the Palestinians are saying point blank, our people aren't worth as much, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is ridiculous that you're releasing people whose rap sheets, for lack of a better description, are all about terrorism, and the people being released by Hamas are people who went to a music festival. So we need to keep reiterating that. This isn't Hamas doing a good thing, although in general terms, I suppose it is. It's about them showing what they did. You know, it's all about perspective when you see these things. It's, Hamas is keeping its end of the bargain. They shouldn't have been allowed to have the leverage to make a bargain like this in the first place. Mm-hmm. You know, and quite honestly, and I've said this before, and I don't care what anybody says about my stance on this, Hamas should be obliterated. Israel should be allowed to go in there and make sure they don't exist anymore. Because the second this thing is declared that it's over, and it's in the history books, Hamas will start to retool to get to the potency that it was before. And it will do this again, because their charter says Israel can't exist. And until they rebuke that, they shouldn't be allowed to exist on the planet. They're terrorists. They're bloodthirsty murderers. They've proven that beyond any doubt now after October 7th. They use rape as a weapon, and they always execute their terror on innocent people. Mm-hmm. They're cowards, and they need to be eliminated. So this idea that they can normalize themselves by coming to the negotiating table, you know, you cannot give them credit for that because they exist in their genesis in bad behavior.
Right. Oh, absolutely. And I guess, Frank, one of the things that people struggle with, I'm sure, is how is it possible that you have some very liberal-minded individuals who seem to sort of recoil when faced with, criticisms of Hamas, and really they have the feeling that Israel's the aggressor and Hamas is responding to that aggression. It just boggles my mind.
It's because A, they don't understand history, and B, they're born of the victimhood mentality, where you've got to be able to find a legitimate reason for someone's actions to give them a quote-unquote truth. Mm-hmm. If you want to be honest and you want to truly understand the quote-unquote Palestinian people, you must look at their genesis. And there has never been a native Palestinian homeland in the Middle East. They are of Cypriot and Aegean area origin, and they were born of the word Philistines, which is a Roman word, and the Romans are the one that put them in that region in the first place as a snub to the Jews who had been there well before Christ. Mm. So the idea that there's some sort of indigenous claim to that land is just a bunch of crap. But the people who go, Hamas is just retaliating for what Israel did, they stop in their knowledge of history in the 20th century, which is shallow and delinquent when it comes to the truth.
Right.
The ironic thing here is that a lot of the times it's college students. It just goes to show you how far our colleges and universities have fallen when it comes to actually teaching critical thinking skills, fact, and accuracy. So, let's keep that in mind as well.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Well, also, Frank, there's a lot of controversy, I suppose, about what's happening with Eric Adams in New York. They dropped the prosecution there. Tom Homan said that they had a meeting where they're going to, get access, of course, I believe, to the to Rikers or jails there. And so they're saying that, Eric Adams is only playing ball, and now this is why this prosecution is being dropped.
Oh, wow. I guess making deals in New York is a new thing.
Exactly. Well, but it's being heralded like this is so terrible. I mean, look what Trump is doing with this, and you have all these judges resigning. But I'm curious, who appointed them in the first place, and what are their proclivities on things?
Well, and Kathy Hochul, who's a marginal at best governor, kind of an embarrassment to New York, if you ask me. Should be looking at the judicial activism that's happened in her state and threatening to remove judges instead of threatening to remove a duly elected mayor. There's processes for removing people, and you don't penalize someone before they've had their day in court. In the United States, we're innocent until proven guilty. She's threatening to remove the mayor because he's cooperating with the federal government. You know, so on the one hand, when there's a Democrat administration in Washington, she says that the word of the federal government is law and it shall be never superseded. But now that there's not a friendly administration in Washington, D.C., she's saying that it must be defied. Talk about a Janus face. You know, talk about speaking out of both sides of her mouth. She has exposed herself as a complete hack partisan. You know, but until the people of New York City wake up and start electing people who actually give a damn about the rule of law, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. I'm sorry, people of New York, but you exist in mass as brainwashed. You know, you just do. Take a look at the rest of the country and figure it out. But yeah, you are an extreme group of people that exist solidly on the left, if not on the radical left. You and your brethren on the very extreme coastal parts of the West.
Mm-hmm. Oh, exactly right.
You know, take a look at the map and realize you're a minority, and not everybody in the minority always gets their way. In the United States, we protect the rights of the minority, but we don't always cede to their point of view and give them always what they want. It's not the way it works. But, you know, if you're talking to a New Yorker, they come from the best city in the world, and you know, even though they walk amongst crime and garbage and everything else, and exactly, and expect you to say, "Wow, what a jewel!" Well, I don't see it as a jewel.
Well, and of course, business, you know, leaves New York. It's not a good business environment. You know, I mean, it seems like at every level that jewel is deteriorating at a record pace. And it is kind of sad because it should not do that. It should be a great place of commerce and of vitality and so forth. But it's the liberal mindset, Frank. It's this, they constantly tear everything down no matter what.
Well, it's the same with Chicago and L.A. You know, the mindset is you'll pay way high taxes for the privilege of saying you're from there, but one of the privileges of being from there is being bled to death as far as the economy is concerned, and worrying about whether you're going to be the next victim of the "I'll punch you in the face" gang or push you onto the subway tracks game that the lawless people pursue almost for entertainment.
You know, Frank, we saw, of course, J.D. Vance late last week travel over to Munich, talk to a bunch of European officials, and talk to them about democracy and not keeping the people from being able to express themselves and so forth. And there's been a lot of pushback, and even so much so as Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, being given a question of what is J.D. Vance trying to accomplish? I mean, he's just irritating our allies now. I mean, can you imagine that?
Yeah, irritating the allies by what? Identifying the fact that they're committed to censorship.
Right.
You know, that's the thing here. He called out the EU leaders on their use of censorship to try to control the people. There's this idea of disinformation and misinformation, and the antidote being that you must kill it so that it doesn't exist is anti-free speech. I don't agree with disinformation, and I don't agree with misinformation, but it's been around since the beginning of time. It's not just an advent of social media. And the antidote to disinformation and misinformation is the truth, and that means more free speech, not less free speech. Despotic people and enterprising politicians who seek to control and who seek to maintain power over people, they employ those anti-free speech tactics in order to maintain their potency. As far as I'm concerned, and there's a lot of people in Britain who feel this way, and a growing movement across Europe that feels this way. The EU has become a totalitarian body that doesn't represent the total of the European people, and they just pee all over sovereignty. Mm-hmm. They don't care about the sovereignty of nations. So the EU Parliament, it was just supposed to be a body to say, hey, let's have free travel and let's have a common currency and let's make sure that's maintained. It wasn't supposed to be this brand new governing body of the entire area. It was supposed to be like a fill in the cracks thing that was only about economics and freedom of movement. Mm-hmm. Now it's this ipso facto globalist entity that's trying to eradicate the sovereignty of states over there.
Right.
They're trying to the autonomy that they want is trying to centralize authority into their body and taking it away from the individual nations, which is not the reason it was actually put together. So Vance calling them out on their idea that you can't say this and we'll penalize you if you do. Do they remember the Nazis?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's really what they're trying to validate. Yeah, and Hitler was right when he said you can't say that, and if you do, you'll be punished. Stalin was right when he said you can't say that or you'll be punished. Any move to curtail free speech, even if it's speech you hate, is an exercise in control.
Yeah, but Frank, because I think we've had some of that here. It seems we've got some really smart people. Yeah, we've got some really smart people who know that whatever you're saying is wrong, and we're just going to go with our smart people. And so you can't say that anymore because they've said that's just not right. We have our fact checkers, and so I'm sorry, you're shut down.
You can't do that. I mean, it sounds so simple to say that, but it's the truth.
Right.
And I go back to the core argument that I said. The disinfectant for falsehood is truth, and the only way that the truth can get out there is for it to not be impeded. It always makes me go back to that scene in Dances with Wolves, which was a great movie when where Kevin Costner has been captured by the Union Army, and a Union soldier has to go out into the weeds to go to the bathroom, and he's ripping pages out of the journal that Kevin Costner was keeping that actually put the history of his relationship with the indigenous people of the region into context and explained so much that would have avoided so much bloodshed. And the guy's using it to wipe his behind with because he needed something for toilet paper. Just because you have the power to do something doesn't always mean you're in the right. And having the power to silence is a dastardly power.
Yes, exactly.
If you're trying to silence someone, it means that you don't have a cogent argument against what they say. And in a free land, amongst a free people, the true power goes to the person who can persuade. So be knowledgeable, make an argument, and stand your ground. Don't just wait for some ipso facto Karen. And I don't know what the male counterpart to Karen is, but I suppose it wears a man bun. Don't let those people be the deciders in your world. Have a spine, stand up and say, you know what? I've got free speech. Thank you very much, but you're dismissed.
Yes, exactly. And what's really ironic too, Frank, is that I wonder what the media people think here in the States, because Donald Trump and J.D. Vance were coming to steal our democracy, and J.D. Vance is lecturing people about democracy and actually talking about what it's really like. I mean, they've got to just be, I don't know, just very, very shocked, shall we say.
Well, our mainstream media has been exposed as being simply bought off toadies of the deep state, for lack of a better word, occupiers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the people who are in control that will do anything to stay in control because they're addicted to power and enriching themselves at the people's expense. The media is no better. They're a cog in that machine. And they're really tempting fate in a day where there's a revolution in how people gather their information, to be part of that old guard, Fourth Estate, and to carry the water for the people who have degraded the freedom and liberties of the mainstream people. It shouldn't be something that's celebrated. You know, every single day we wake up to what the government's been doing to us for decades, and this is thanks to Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and Elon Musk especially. Every day that we find out one more atrocity that's been perpetrated on the American people, to sign up and proudly say, I'm part of that cabal? We're shocked you're trying to kill democracy. Really? You've just self-identified as part of the problem. You know, now my trust in you is zero. It's worse than Congress, and that's saying something.
Exactly right. Well, you know, Frank, I mentioned this just a little while earlier on the program, but I just wanted to get your take on this. So Sheryl Crow has now sold her Tesla, and she's donated the proceeds to NPR to protest Elon Musk. And so I don't know, maybe you think he'll resign tomorrow and that'd just be too much for him?
Just remember, Sheryl Crow's big hit that broke her into the mainstream was about day drinking. You know, she writes songs. That doesn't make her an intellect. It makes her talented, but it doesn't make her an intellect. And anybody who's taking their cues from people who are in the entertainment industry as far as politics and society are concerned, you got to grow up, because life is not a song. And it will do things to you that you don't expect if you're just waiting for the next verse to come because you're waiting for something to sound good to you. And Sheryl Crow, she's a blazing liberal, and she doesn't shy away from abusing her position to manipulate the people that call themselves her fans, and she should be ashamed of herself for that.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
She can do whatever she wants. Just don't stand there with with an air of authority because you have an opinion.
You're listening to Underground USA.
Wokeism is a threat to the very foundations of our great nation and to the very principles of liberty and justice. The goal of wokeism is to divide us, pitting Americans against one another based on race, gender, and identity. This ideology undermines free speech and open dialogue, which are the bedrock of our republic. It promotes censorship and cancels anyone who dares to challenge its extreme agenda. We must stand against this cultural Marxism and protect our constitutional rights. Say no to wokeism.
Before we go, and I rarely do this, I think I did it once for my good friend Judson Carroll, who hosts the Southern Appalachian Herbs podcast on iHeart, a great resource if you're looking to get more natural with your health. Anyway, before I go, I wanted to share with you a column I am thoroughly enjoying. It's called Clusterfuck Nation, and it's written and sometimes produced, he has an associated podcast, by James Howard Kunstler, who over his career has written for Rolling Stone, The Atlantic, and the New York Times Magazine. Now, you'd think that with bona fides like those, he'd be an unwashed left-winger, but he's not. Either he's realized the Kool-Aid was mixed with a blend of arsenic and bullshit, or he just saw the light. Kunstler's take on what is happening today is spot on, especially his take on the deep state, which he calls the blob. You can read his stuff for free, just like you can with Underground USA, but if you appreciate the work and the insight, it never hurts to help the cause financially. Now that Substack allows monthly remittance, it's easier than ever, and as the woman on the commercial says, it costs less than a cup of coffee at a Starbucks once a month. So check out Clusterfuck Nation by James Howard Kunstler after you finish here at Underground USA. I don't believe you'll be disappointed.
The foundation of our great nation lies in our unwavering commitment to freedom, and at its core is the principle of free speech. It's not just a right, but a duty to speak our minds, respectfully debate, and challenge ideas. Today, free speech is under attack by the forces of the deep state and the globalists. We must all do our part to protect free speech, for without it, we'd be lost in a sea of woke conformity and censorship. We have the right. Protect it.
If you like the podcast, please head on over to undergroundusa.com and sign up for our Substack. It comes directly into your email inbox with every new podcast and article. And be sure to do your part to fight for the Republic. Talk to your family, friends, colleagues, and acquaintances about politics, current events, and even religion. When we have these conversations, we realize we have more in common than we have in difference, that there's more of us than there are of them, and by them I mean the deep state dividers who do everything they possibly can to divide us up into balkanized groups so they can cobble together their 51% come election time. We have to throw a wrench into that machine. That will save the Republic. You're listening to Underground USA. No fear, no political correctness, and no wokeism. I'm Frank Salvato.